When I bought my house 15 years ago, the main reason I chose this property was the enormous old oak tree that stood proudly at the edge of my yard. It wasn't just a tree, it was a piece of history. According to county records, it had been there for over 100 years, surviving storms, droughts, and generations of families. It provided shade in the summer, a home for countless birds and squirrels, and a beautiful canopy that made my backyard feel like a private park. For years, no one had a problem with it. Until Karen moved in next door. Karen was the type of neighbor everyone dreads. From the moment she moved in, she treated the neighborhood like her personal kingdom. She became president of the HOA within weeks and immediately began policing everyone's property. Whether it was the color of someone's shutters or the length of their grass, she always had something to complain about. At first, her interference in my life was minor. She sent me passive-aggressive letters about my mailbox needing a fresh coat of paint or how my recycling bins weren't properly concealed. I ignored most of it, knowing my property technically wasn't under the HOA's jurisdiction. That didn't stop her, though. She believed her authority extended to anything she could see from her kitchen window. The real trouble began the day she decided she didn't like my tree. One afternoon, I found Karen standing in my yard without permission, glaring up at the oak with her hands on her hips. When I confronted her, she claimed the tree was a safety hazard because some of its branches extended slightly over a fence line. I calmly explained that the tree had been inspected just last year by a certified arborist and was perfectly healthy. Karen didn't care about facts. She wrinkled her nose and said, "It's an eyesore. It blocks the view from my deck, and those leaves keep blowing into my yard. It needs to go." I laughed, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. Over the next few weeks, she escalated her campaign against the oak. She sent multiple letters demanding I cut it down. She even brought it up at an HOA meeting, trying to rally the other neighbors to her cause. Most of them didn't care, and a few even told her they loved the tree. But Karen was relentless. Then came the day everything changed. I woke up early one Saturday to the sound of buzzing chainsaws. At first, I thought someone was doing routine yard work, but the noise was coming from my property. I rushed outside and my heart sank. Karen had hired a tree removal crew without my permission. 2 workers were already halfway up my beloved oak, cutting thick branches. Karen stood nearby, barking orders like she owned the place. I shouted for them to stop, but she held up a piece of paper and smugly declared, "The HOA approved this. You were given notice, and since you failed to act, we're taking care of it ourselves." I knew immediately that her notice was fake. The HOA had no legal authority over my property. This was outright trespassing and destruction of private property. I demanded they leave immediately, but Karen ignored me. The crew hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. But Karen insisted she had the right to proceed. Against my better judgment, I stepped back and started recording everything on my phone. I knew I would need proof later. As the workers cut deeper into the tree, I noticed something alarming. The crew wasn't following proper safety procedures. They hadn't braced the trunk correctly, and they were cutting from the wrong angle. The branches were falling haphazardly, narrowly missing Karen's fence. I shouted a warning, but Karen rolled her eyes and yelled, "Stay out of this. It's my yard too." It wasn't her yard, and she was about to learn that lesson the hard way. Moments later, there was a loud, cracking sound as one of the workers made a final cut near the base. The massive oak groaned and shifted. Instead of falling into my yard as they planned, it began to tip toward Karen's property. Karen's smug expression vanished. The tree came crashing down directly onto her house with a deafening boom. Branches punched through her roof, shattering windows and tearing through her carefully manicured deck. The chainsaw crew scrambled out of the way, shouting in panic. I stood there in stunned silence, phone still recording. Karen screamed in disbelief as she watched her perfect home get crushed under the weight of the tree she had been so desperate to remove. In her rush to destroy something she didn't own, she had brought disaster on herself. The aftermath was chaotic. Neighbors rushed over to see what had happened. Some tried to help Karen, while others just stood in shock. Karen, furious and humiliated, pointed at me and shouted, "This is your fault. You're going to pay for this." But the evidence was all on my side. I calmly explained to the crowd, and to the police when they arrived, that Karen had hired the crew without my permission. I showed them the video footage, which clearly captured her giving orders to the workers and falsely claiming she had legal authority. The officers didn't take long to piece it together. Karen was cited for trespassing, destruction of private property, and reckless endangerment. The tree crew, realizing they'd been tricked into an illegal job, provided written statements confirming that Karen had hired them personally and lied about having the right to cut the tree down. Insurance investigators later determined that since Karen had initiated the removal and caused the damage, she was fully responsible for the cost of repairs to her own home. Her homeowner's insurance refused to cover a cent, citing her illegal actions. The HOA tried to distance themselves from her immediately. At the next meeting, several members voted to remove her as president. They claimed they had no idea she'd gone so far, though I suspected some of them had quietly supported her until things went wrong. As for me, my tree was gone, and that hurt more than I could express. But at least I had justice. I hired an attorney and filed a civil lawsuit against Karen for the destruction of my property and emotional distress. With the video evidence and multiple witness statements, my case was rock solid. Karen tried to countersue, still clinging to her delusion that she had been in the right. The judge didn't buy it. She lost spectacularly, and the court ordered her to pay for the full value of the tree, as well as additional damages and legal fees. By the time it was over, Karen was financially ruined. Her once perfect house was patched together with cheap repairs, and her reputation in the neighborhood was destroyed. No one trusted her anymore, and she eventually resigned from the HOA entirely. Months later, I planted a new tree, not as large as the old oak, but healthy and full of promise. I placed a tall, sturdy fence around it with clear no trespassing signs, leaving no room for misunderstanding. Every time I walk past that spot, I think about how Karen's obsession with control led to her downfall. She wanted to dictate what happened on my property, and in the end, her reckless actions literally crushed her own home. The neighborhood eventually returned to normal, but the story of Karen and the fallen tree became a local legend. People still talk about it whenever someone new moves in, a cautionary tale about respecting boundaries and the consequences of arrogance. Karen moved away, quietly a few months later, leaving behind the wreckage she created. As for me, I learned an important lesson, too. Sometimes the best revenge is simply letting people's actions come back to haunt them. Karen cut down my tree without permission, but in the end, it was her own house that fell,